A hospital receptionist noticed the same 8-year-old boy bringing his baby sister to the ER twice in 1 week. When she reviewed security footage, what she saw the parents doing made her blood freeze. The fluorescent lights of Millhaven General Hospital's emergency room buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow that made everyone look sickly. Outside, a January storm rattled the windows, pelting them with sleet that had been falling steadily since dusk. It was the kind of bitter cold that Millhaven, Connecticut was known for, the type that seeped into bones and lingered there until April grudgingly gave way to spring. Judith Winters glanced at the wall clock. 9:47 p.m. The night shift had been mercifully quiet so far, giving her time to catch up on patient intake records. 15 years at the hospital's front desk had taught her to appreciate these lulls. They never lasted. As if on cue, the automatic doors slid open, bringing in a blast of frigid air and the sound of a baby's weak cries. Judith looked up, expecting to see harried parents rushing in with a child. Instead, she saw a slight figure struggling through the doorway, weighed down by what appeared to be an infant car seat and a battered backpack. "I need help, please," said a voice too composed to belong to its owner. "My sister won't stop crying." The boy couldn't have been older than 8 or 9, yet he stood at the counter with the determined expression of someone much older. Dark shadows hung beneath serious brown eyes. His jacket was zipped up improperly, one side higher than the other, and his knit hat was dusted with melting sleet. "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" Judith asked, already rising from her chair, her eyes fixed on the infant who continued to whimper in the car seat the boy had carefully placed on the floor. "My mom's working. Dad's busy." The boy's eyes darted briefly to the side, a tell Judith recognized from her years as a social worker before switching to hospital administration. "I'm Oliver. Hey, this is Chloe. She's 6 months old." Judith came around the desk, crouching to check on the baby. Chloe's face was flushed, her fine blonde hair damp with sweat despite the cold. Her cries were pitiful, lacking the robust energy a healthy baby should have. "How long has she been crying, Oliver?" "Since after her bottle at 6. I tried everything. I checked her diaper and gave her the medicine in the purple bottle for teething, but it didn't help." His voice cracked slightly, the first sign of the child behind the facade. "She feels really hot." Judith placed a gentle hand on Chloe's forehead. The baby was burning up. "You did the right thing bringing her in," she said, already reaching for the phone to call for a pediatric nurse. "Can you tell me your address and your parents' phone numbers?" Oliver rattled off their address in the Riverdale Apartments, the subsidized housing complex on the east side of town where the old textile mill once stood. He recited his mother's cell number without hesitation but paused before giving his father's. "Dad doesn't always answer his phone," he added quietly. While they waited for the nurse, Judith observed Oliver more carefully. His clothes were clean but worn. The backpack he'd brought contained neatly packed baby supplies: diapers, wipes, a change of clothes for Chloe, and 2 pre-made bottles. Everything a parent would bring for an emergency room visit. Everything except the parent. She tried calling both numbers Oliver had provided. His mother's went straight to voicemail. His father's rang endlessly with no answer or option to leave a message. "My mom works nights at Pine Ridge Care Home," Oliver volunteered, noticing her frown. "She might not be able to answer right now." Judith had worked in Millhaven long enough to know Pine Ridge well, a nursing home on the other side of town. It was plausible, but something in the boy's too-rehearsed explanation raised flags in her mind. Dr. Landon diagnosed Chloe with a severe ear infection. While the pediatrician administered medication and wrote prescriptions, Judith sat with Oliver in the examination room. "You seem to know a lot about taking care of your sister," she said gently. Oliver nodded, his eyes never leaving Chloe as the doctor checked her ears. "Mom taught me everything. Dad says I'm the man of the house when he's not home." A hint of pride colored his voice. "And is he not home often?" A subtle stiffening in the boy's shoulders. "He has to look for work. The factory closed." Millhaven Manufacturing had shut down almost 2 years ago, leaving hundreds unemployed in a town already struggling to survive. It was a common story in this hospital, the aftermath of economic collapse manifesting in stress-related illnesses, postponed treatments, and unpaid medical bills. "How did you get here tonight, Oliver?" Judith asked, already suspecting the answer. "We walked." The way he said it, matter-of-fact, without complaint, made something twist inside Judith's chest. "In this weather? From Riverdale? That's almost 2 miles. Oliver shrugged. "I wrapped Chloe up really good. I put her in the snowsuit and then blankets. And I was careful about the ice. Dr. Landon glanced up at Judith, a silent communication passing between them. They'd both seen cases of neglect before, though rarely with a child caretaker so young yet so capable. "Oliver," the doctor said kindly, "you did an excellent job bringing your sister in. The medicine we're giving her will help her feel better soon. But I'm concerned about you two getting home safely tonight." "I can manage," Oliver insisted, that strange adult determination returning to his face. "I've done it before." The simple statement hung in the air, heavy with implications. 3 hours later, after multiple failed attempts to reach either parent, Judith found herself driving through the storm with Oliver and Chloe in her car. Hospital protocol dictated contacting Child Protective Services in such situations, but Dr. Landon had agreed to give the parents until morning to make contact before filing a report. In the meantime, Judith had volunteered to drive the children home. "That one," Oliver pointed to a 5-story brick building, its facade crumbling in places. "Apartment 3C. Judith pulled into a parking space, killed the engine, and turned to face him. "I'm going to come up with you to make sure someone's home." For the first time, she saw real fear flash across his face. "You don't have to. I have my key. I need to explain Chloe's medications to your parents, Oliver." His hands twisted in his lap. "Dad might be sleeping. He gets mad if someone wakes him up." "I'll be very quiet," Judith promised, already unbuckling her seatbelt, her concern deepening with each passing moment. The building's entryway smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke. The elevator was out of order. A handwritten note indicated it had been that way for 3 weeks. They climbed the stairs slowly, Oliver carrying the backpack while Judith managed the car seat where Chloe now slept peacefully, the medicine having taken effect. Apartment 3C's door was battered around the edges. Oliver took a deep breath before inserting his key into the lock. "Please be quiet," he whispered again. The apartment beyond was dark save for the blue glow of a television in what appeared to be the living room. The air was stale, with undertones of unwashed dishes and dirty laundry. Oliver moved with practiced stealth, placing his backpack on a small kitchen table and gesturing for Judith to follow him. "Mom," he called softly. "Mom, we're home." No response. Judith's eyes adjusted to the dimness. The kitchen was small and cluttered. Dishes were piled in the sink. On the counter, a row of baby bottles stood drying next to a can of formula. A handwritten feeding chart was taped to the refrigerator door, the careful but childish handwriting unmistakably Oliver's. He led her to a short hallway. "Mom's room is there," he whispered, pointing to a closed door. "Chloe and I are in here." He opened another door to reveal a tiny bedroom. A twin bed was pushed against one wall, and a crib stood opposite. The room was surprisingly tidy compared to what she'd seen of the rest of the apartment. Oliver hovered anxiously in the doorway. "I can put Chloe to bed now. I know how to give her the medicine when she wakes up." Judith carefully placed the car seat on the floor and crouched to meet Oliver's eyes. "I need to speak with one of your parents, Oliver. Is your mom home?" His gaze dropped to the floor. She might have already left for work. "And your father?" A longer pause. "Sometimes he goes out." Movement from the living room interrupted them. The sound of a recliner creaking, followed by heavy footsteps. A man appeared in the hallway, his silhouette backlit by the television's glow. "What the hell's going on?" His words were slightly slurred. "Who are you? Mr. Hayes?" "I'm Judith Winters from Millhaven General. Oliver brought Chloe to the emergency room tonight. She has a severe ear infection." Ray Hayes was a large man with the weathered hands of someone who'd worked in manufacturing. Now he swayed slightly, steadying himself against the wall. The smell of whiskey emanated from him. Hospital? What are you talking about? He squinted at Oliver. You took your sister out in this weather? What were you thinking? Oliver seemed to shrink before Judith's eyes. She wouldn't stop crying, Dad. I tried everything like Mom showed me. Where is Mrs. Hayes? Judith interjected, keeping her voice calm and professional despite the anger building inside her. Ray's expression hardened. Working. Night shift. I tried calling her cell phone. Service got cut off last week, he snapped. Look, I appreciate you bringing them home, but we're fine here. I got this. His tone made it clear the conversation was over, but Judith stood her ground. Mr. Hayes, Chloe needs to take antibiotics every 8 hours. She has prescription eardrops as well. I can show you. Oliver knows what to do, don't you, buddy? Ray interrupted, the endearment at odds with the cold look he gave his son. He's real good with Chloe. Regular little nurse. Oliver nodded quickly. I can do it, Dad. Judith hesitated, torn between protocol and instinct. This situation clearly warranted a CPS report, but experience told her that immediate intervention might not be in the children's best interest tonight. Sometimes the system moved too quickly, sometimes too slowly. Either way, children were the ones who suffered. Oliver did the right thing tonight, she said firmly to Ray. Chloe could have developed a much more serious condition without treatment. I'd like to make sure Mrs. Hayes understands the medication schedule when she returns from work. Ray's expression darkened further. Like I said, we got this. Oliver can tell her. With clear dismissal, he turned and disappeared back into the living room. The sound of a beer can opening followed seconds later. Judith turned to Oliver, who was carefully lifting and now stirring Chloe from her car seat. His movements were practiced and gentle, small hands supporting the baby's head, body shifting to accommodate her weight. It was both impressive and heartbreaking to watch. When will your mom be home, Oliver? She asked quietly. He avoided her eyes, focusing on settling Chloe in the crib. Morning, probably, after her shift. Another lie. Judith was certain now. She made a decision. Here's my card, she said, pressing it into his hand. It has my personal cell number on the back. If Chloe gets worse again, or if you need anything at all, you call me. Day or night. Do you understand? Oliver stared at the card, then tucked it carefully into his pocket. Yes, ma'am. Promise me you'll call if you need help. He nodded, but Judith recognized the look in his eyes, the wariness of a child who had learned not to trust adult promises. The storm had worsened by the time Judith returned to her car. She sat for a long moment, watching the sleet turn to snow, her windshield wipers pushing futilely against the accumulation. Through the third-floor window, she could see Oliver's silhouette moving about the room, tending to his sister. In her 25 years of social work and hospital administration, Judith had encountered countless cases of neglect, abuse, and hardship. Some had ended tragically, others with hope and healing. Experience had taught her that the system, for all its flaws, was sometimes the only protection children had. But she'd also learned that intervention needed to be handled with care. Tonight, she would file a preliminary report, enough to start a file but not enough to trigger immediate removal. Tomorrow, she would make calls, check records, build a more complete picture. The Hayes family needed help, that much was clear. But Oliver's fierce protection of his sister and his desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of a functioning family told her that a heavy-handed approach might do more harm than good. As she drove away from Riverdale Apartments, her headlights cutting weakly through the thickening snow, Judith couldn't shake the image of Oliver's serious face as he'd walked through those hospital doors, a child carrying the weight of responsibilities no child should bear. In the safety of her car, Judith allowed the tears she'd held back all evening to finally fall. By morning, the storm would have passed, but the questions it had stirred would remain. Where was Diane Hayes really? How long had Oliver been caring for Chloe alone? And most importantly, what was the best way to help a boy who'd forgotten how to be a child? The answers would come soon enough, and they would be even more heartbreaking than Judith feared. 5 days had passed since Oliver's first visit to Millhaven General. 5 days of winter deepening its grip on the small Connecticut town, turning streets into corridors of grimy snow and transforming the river that gave Mill Haven its name into a sluggish, ice-fringed current. The storm had passed, but the cold remained, settling into the bones of the town like a persistent ache. Judith Winters was nearing the end of another night shift when the automatic doors slid open. The clock read 11:23 p.m. She recognized Oliver immediately, despite the oversized wool hat pulled low over his forehead. He struggled through the entrance, this time with Chloe wrapped in a bundle of blankets rather than in her car seat. Something about the urgency in his step made Judith rise from her desk before he'd even reached her. "She won't wake up properly," he said without preamble, his voice cracking. "She just keeps making this weird sound and she's so hot." Judith reached for the bundle in his arms. Chloe's face was flushed an alarming shade of red, her breathing labored and wheezy. Even through the blankets, Judith could feel the heat radiating from the infant's small body. "How long has she been like this?" she asked, already motioning to a nearby nurse. "She was fussy all day," Oliver replied, his composure finally beginning to crack. "But after dinner, she just got worse and worse. I gave her the medicine from last time, but it didn't help." The pediatric team moved quickly, whisking Chloe away to an examination room. Oliver stood rooted to the spot, suddenly looking very much his age without his sister in his arms. His coat was unzipped despite the cold, revealing mismatched pajama top and jeans underneath. His sneakers were soaked through from the slush. "Your parents?" Judith asked, already knowing the answer. Oliver's eyes darted away. "Mom's not feeling good. Dad's not home." Judith crouched down to his level. "Oliver, we need to contact them. This is serious." "I left a note," he said, his voice small. "In case they come back before I do. In case they come back." The phrasing sent a chill through Judith that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Wait here," she said gently. "I'm going to check on your sister, and then you and I need to have a talk. Dr. Morgan, the pediatrician on duty, met Judith outside the examination room 20 minutes later. His expression was grave. Severe ear infection that spread to her sinuses, plus significant dehydration and early signs of malnutrition, he said in a low voice, glancing toward the waiting area where Oliver sat. "Her weight is below the 5th percentile for her age. The antibiotics from her previous visit should have prevented this if they'd been administered properly. The brother claims he's been giving them to her," Judith said. Dr. Morgan's brow furrowed. "Maybe, but not consistently or correctly. And there are other concerns. Her diaper rash is severe, and she shows signs of having been in the same clothing for quite some time." He hesitated, then added, "I need to report this, Judith. You know that." "I know." She'd already filed her preliminary report after the first visit, but had been gathering more information before pushing for intervention. Now it seemed time had run out. "Let me talk to the boy first." Oliver sat in a chair much too large for him, his feet barely touching the ground. He'd removed his wet hat, revealing dark hair in need of washing. Now that Judith looked more closely, she noticed a smudge of what might have been baby food on his shirt collar and the dark circles under his eyes that had only deepened since their last meeting. She sat beside him. "The doctor is taking good care of Chloe. She's very sick, but they're giving her medicine through an IV that will help her feel better quickly. Can I see her?" His voice was barely audible. "Soon," Judith promised. "First, I need you to tell me the truth about what's happening at home, Oliver. No more stories." His shoulders slumped. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at his wet sneakers. "Is your mom really at work?" Judith pressed gently, a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Is she at home?" A nod. "But she's not taking care of Chloe?" His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back fiercely. "She can't get out of bed most days," he whispered. "She says her heart hurts too much to move. And your dad?" "He goes out to find work," Oliver recited, but the rehearsed quality was gone, replaced by weariness. "But he doesn't come home sometimes for days. How long have you been taking care of Chloe by yourself?" Oliver shrugged. I don't know. A long time. Since she was really tiny. And who takes care of you, Oliver? The question seemed to confuse him. After a pause, he said, I do. While Oliver was finally allowed to see his sister, Judith retreated to the security office. The night guard, Tom Fitzgerald, had worked at Millhaven General almost as long as she had. I need to check camera footage from last Tuesday night and tonight, she explained. Around 9:30 last week and 11:15 tonight. Tom didn't ask questions. In a small town like Millhaven, hospital staff became a kind of family, bound by the shared weight of the community's hardships. He pulled up the external camera feed, rewinding to the specified times. The footage from Tuesday night showed exactly what Judith had suspected. Oliver, struggling through the snow with the infant car seat, having walked all the way from Riverdale Apartments. Tonight's footage was even more disturbing. The small figure trudging through freezing temperatures with a bundle clutched to his chest, stopping occasionally as if gathering strength before continuing. Jesus, Tom muttered. That kid walked all the way here? In this weather? With a baby? Twice, Judith confirmed grimly. Where the hell are the parents? It was the question that had been haunting Judith for 5 days. After her first encounter with the Hayes family, she'd done some investigating. Diane Hayes had indeed worked at Pine Ridge Care Home, past tense. She'd been let go 3 months ago for excessive absences. Ray Hayes had been among those laid off when Millhaven Manufacturing closed, but unlike many others, he hadn't found new employment. Instead, according to local gossip, he'd become a regular at the OTB parlor 2 towns over. I'm about to find out, Judith said, reaching for her phone. Chloe was admitted for overnight treatment. Oliver refused to leave her side, his small hand clutching the rail of the hospital crib as if afraid she might disappear. Judith had called Child Protective Services, and Vanessa Torres, a caseworker Judith had worked with before, was en route. Meanwhile, Dr. Morgan had convinced Oliver to eat something from the cafeteria, probably the first real meal he'd had in days. Judith used the opportunity to pay a visit to Riverdale Apartments. The building looked even more desolate in the harsh winter night. The entry buzzer for 3C went unanswered, but an elderly tenant exiting the building let Judith in with a knowing look. You here for the Hayes place? 3rd floor. Can't miss it. Been meaning to call somebody myself about that situation. Apartment 3C was silent when Judith knocked. She tried again, louder. Mrs. Hayes? It's Judith Winters from Millhaven General. Your children are at the hospital. After a long pause, Judith heard shuffling from inside. The door opened just enough to reveal a sliver of a woman's face. Gaunt, pale, with eyes that seemed to have trouble focusing. Hospital. Diane Hayes's voice was hoarse, as if from disuse. What are you talking about? Your daughter Chloe is very ill. Your son Oliver brought her to the emergency room. Confusion crossed Diane's features. No, they're here. They're sleeping. May I come in, Mrs. Hayes? Judith kept her tone professional, non-confrontational. After a hesitation, the door opened wider. The apartment beyond was in even worse condition than on Judith's previous visit. The smell of neglect had intensified. Unwashed bodies, spoiled food, dirty diapers. Dishes overflowed from the sink onto the counters. Baby bottles sat uncleaned. A layer of dust covered most surfaces. Diane herself looked like a ghost, thin to the point of gauntness, hair unwashed and tangled, wearing what appeared to be a nightgown with a stained bathrobe over it. Her movements were slow, almost drugged, though Judith saw no evidence of substance abuse beyond a few empty beer cans. When did you last see Oliver and Chloe? Judith asked gently. Diane blinked slowly, as if the question required immense processing. This morning? They were here. Her voice trailed off as she glanced around the apartment, reality slowly penetrating the fog surrounding her. Where are they? At the hospital. Chloe has a severe infection and is dehydrated. Oliver has been caring for her, it seems. Oliver's good with her, Diane mumbled, sinking onto a couch covered with unfolded laundry. He helps me so much. Mrs. Hayes, when was the last time you saw a doctor yourself? A vague shrug. Don't need doctors. Just need sleep. Judith recognized the signs of severe depression, had seen it countless times in her social work years. This wasn't just a mother neglecting her children. This was a woman who'd lost the ability to care for herself, let alone anyone else. What about your husband? When will he be home? Another shrug. Whenever the money runs out. Or when he wins big. That's what he always says. He's gonna win big and fix everything. And how long has this been going on? Diane's vacant eyes welled with tears. Since the baby came. Everything went dark after the baby came. Postpartum depression, untreated and worsened by financial stress and apparent abandonment by her husband. The pieces were falling into place. I'm going to call an ambulance for you, Mrs. Hayes, Judith said firmly. You need medical attention. I can't leave, Diane protested weakly. The children are already at the hospital, and they need their mother to get well. As she called for the ambulance, Judith took in more details of the apartment. Oliver's careful organization was evident amid the chaos. A neat stack of clean baby clothes on a chair, formula measured into bottles in the refrigerator, a schedule for feeding and changing taped beside it. The boy had created a system within the dysfunction, a way to care for his sister despite everything crumbling around them. In a small bedroom, she found the proof of how long the situation had deteriorated. A twin bed with dinosaur sheets, clearly Oliver's, showed signs of having 2 regular occupants. A small depression in one pillow matched Chloe's size. The crib in the corner was dusty with disuse. On a small desk, meticulously organized, were Oliver's school materials. His homework assignments were completed and placed in color-coded folders. A certificate of achievement from his school dated 2 months ago celebrated his perfect attendance and academic excellence. Somehow, amid everything, the boy had maintained his studies. Next to the school materials was a journal, its cover decorated with careful but childish drawings of superheroes. Judith normally would never violate a child's privacy, but concern overrode protocol. She opened it, finding pages filled with detailed notes on Chloe's care. December 5th. Chloe drank all 3 bottles today. No fever. Smiled a lot. Mom stayed in bed again. Dad came home but left when they started fighting. December 12th. Chloe only drank half her bottles. Cried a lot. Feels warm. Mom came to the kitchen today but went back to bed. No food in the house except baby formula and cereal. Used my lunch money to buy milk. December 24th. Christmas Eve. Told Chloe about Santa. Dad promised to be home with presents but didn't come. Mom cried all day. Made Chloe a present from an old sock and stuffing from my pillow. She liked it. January 2nd. No school today. Chloe seems sick. Mom won't get up. Dad hasn't been home in 3 days. Called Grandma but she said she can't help right now. Chloe's formula is almost gone. The entries continued, becoming increasingly concerning as January progressed. The last entry, dated just yesterday, read simply, Chloe won't stop crying. Don't know what to do. So tired. Judith closed the journal, her heart heavy. Outside, she could hear the approaching sirens of the ambulance she'd called for Diane. As a former social worker, she'd witnessed countless cases of neglect, but few had affected her as deeply as this one. A child forced to become a parent while still desperately needing to be parented himself. Back at the hospital, Vanessa Torres from CPS had arrived and was interviewing Oliver. Judith observed through the glass window of the family consultation room. The boy sat straight-backed in his chair, answering questions with the same controlled composure he'd shown when first bringing Chloe in. Only someone watching closely would notice his hands fidgeting anxiously beneath the table or the way his eyes constantly darted to the door, as if expecting or fearing someone's arrival. When Judith entered, Oliver's expression brightened momentarily before caution returned. Is Chloe okay? She's improving, Judith assured him. The doctors are taking very good care of her. And my mom? The question was hesitant, revealing his fear of the answer. She's on her way here too. She needs some help, Oliver. He nodded solemnly. Because of her sad sickness. That's right. Depression is an illness, just like Chloe's infection. It needs treatment. Vanessa, An experienced caseworker with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor spoke up. Oliver has been telling me about your home life. He's been very brave. The boy's composure finally cracked. Are you going to take us away? Please don't separate us. I promised Chloe I'd always protect her. No decisions have been made yet, Vanessa said carefully. Our priority is making sure everyone is safe and getting the help they need. I can take care of her, Oliver insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. I've been doing it for months. I have a system. I write everything down so I don't forget anything important. I never miss her feedings, and I always check if her diaper is wet. And, Oliver, Judith interrupted gently. You're only 8 years old. Almost 9, he corrected, as if that made all the difference. Even so, that's too young to have all this responsibility. You should be worrying about school and friends and what games to play, not whether your sister has enough formula or if your mother is going to get out of bed. But there's nobody else, he whispered, and the simple truth of it hung in the air between them. Judith exchanged glances with Vanessa. They both knew the system, its strengths and its many flaws. Children like Oliver and Chloe often fell through the cracks, shuttled between temporary placements, sometimes separated despite best intentions. Finding a foster home willing to take siblings, especially with an infant, was challenging. And Judith knew something else, something she'd never admitted to colleagues. She understood Oliver's desperation all too well. Her own childhood had included a stint in foster care after her mother's mental health crisis. 3 homes in 2 years, separated from her younger brother until their aunt had finally intervened. The memories still haunted her at times. But before Judith could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Ray Hayes had arrived, and he was furious. Where are my kids? His voice boomed through the corridor. What right do you have to bring them here without contacting me? He spotted Oliver through the consultation room window and stormed toward them, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. Security was already moving in his direction. Oliver's transformation was immediate and heartbreaking. The boy seemed to shrink into himself, shoulders hunching as if preparing for a blow, eyes dropping to the floor. The change spoke volumes about the relationship between father and son. Ray burst into the room, bringing with him the sour smell of stale alcohol. Oliver, what the hell were you thinking, bringing your sister out in this weather? You could have called me. Vanessa stepped between them, her ID badge extended. Mr. Hayes, I'm Vanessa Torres from Child Protective Services. I need you to lower your voice and take a seat. CPS. Ray's expression darkened further. What is this, some kind of ambush? My kids are fine. This is all a misunderstanding. Your 6-month-old daughter is hospitalized with a severe infection, dehydration, and malnutrition, Judith said flatly. Your wife is being brought in for what appears to be severe depression, and your 8-year-old son has been acting as the sole caretaker for both of them. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Hayes. Ray's anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by defensive indignation. Times have been tough since the factory closed. Diane hasn't been herself, but we're handling it. No, sir, Vanessa corrected firmly. Oliver has been handling it. A child who should be in 3rd grade has been managing your household, caring for an infant, monitoring his mother's depression, and somehow maintaining his grades, all while you've apparently been gambling away what little money the family has left. Ray's face reddened. You don't know anything about me or my family. I know enough to have serious concerns about the welfare of these children, Vanessa replied, and enough to require your cooperation if you want any say in what happens next. The standoff continued for several tense moments before Ray seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. He slumped into a chair, suddenly looking much older than his years. What happens now? He asked, all bluster gone. Now, Vanessa said, we discuss how to ensure Oliver and Chloe's safety and well-being while you and Mrs. Hayes get the help you clearly need. Throughout this exchange, Oliver had remained silent, his eyes darting between the adults. Now he spoke, his voice small but determined. Can I go see Chloe? She gets scared when she wakes up in new places. The simple request, so thoughtful amidst the adult chaos, brought a lump to Judith's throat. This child, who'd had his own childhood stolen by circumstance, still thought first and foremost of his sister's comfort. "Of course," Judith said, standing and offering her hand. "I'll take you to her." As they left the consultation room, leaving Vanessa to begin the formal assessment with Ray, Oliver's small hand slipped into Judith's. It was an unconscious gesture, a child reaching for security in a moment of uncertainty. But it spoke volumes about the trust he'd begun to place in her. "Is my dad in trouble?" he asked quietly as they walked toward the pediatric ward. "Your dad is facing some difficult choices," Judith answered carefully. "But hopefully this will be the wake-up call he needs to make better ones." Oliver nodded solemnly. "He's not always like that, you know. Sometimes he's really nice. He taught me how to throw a baseball last summer, before Chloe got born. And he used to make pancakes on Sundays." The need to defend his father, despite everything, was another heartbreaking testament to Oliver's premature emotional burden. Children should not have to make excuses for their parents' failures. "People can change, Oliver," Judith said gently, "especially when they have something important to change for." As they reached Chloe's room, the baby was awake, her color already improved from the IV fluids and medication. When she spotted Oliver, her face lit up with a toothless smile that transformed her from a sick infant into a radiant reminder of resilience. Oliver rushed to her side, all protocol forgotten as he reached through the crib railings to touch her tiny hand. "Hey, Chloe Bear," he whispered. "I told you the doctors would make you feel better." Judith watched from the doorway as brother and sister communicated in their own language of smiles and gentle touches. The bond between them was palpable, forged in adversity but unbreakable because of it. In that moment, Judith made a silent promise to herself. Whatever happened next, whatever bureaucratic hurdles and systemic challenges lay ahead, she would not let these children become just another case file. They deserved better than that. They deserved a chance at the childhood that circumstances had begun to steal from them. As if sensing her thoughts, Oliver looked up and met her gaze. In his eyes, Judith saw a flicker of something that had been missing before. Hope, fragile but present. It was a beginning. Outside the hospital windows, dawn was breaking over Millhaven, pale winter sunlight reflecting off the snow-covered streets. A new day, bringing with it the promise of change, for better or worse remained to be seen. The Hayes family apartment fell under the harsh scrutiny of daylight as Vanessa Torres conducted her official home assessment. Sunlight streamed through grimy windows, illuminating what the dim evening light had partially concealed during Judith's previous visits. The full extent of the family's disintegration. Vanessa moved methodically through the small space, taking photographs and making notes on her tablet. Judith accompanied her, pointing out details she'd noticed before. Oliver's careful organization amid the chaos, the handwritten feeding charts, the unused crib. 8 years old, Vanessa murmured, shaking her head as she examined the journal Judith had discovered. "I've seen parentified children before, but this level of systematic caretaking is extraordinary." "He's been doing it for months," Judith replied, "possibly since Chloe was born." The refrigerator contained little besides baby formula and a few cans of soda. The cabinets held some cereal, crackers, and canned soup, the kind of provisions an 8-year-old might choose when left to grocery shop alone. Bills were scattered across a small desk in the corner, most stamped with final notices or disconnection warnings. In the bathroom, prescription bottles lined a shelf. Antidepressants prescribed to Diane Hayes, most of them still full or barely touched. The date on the most recent bottle was from 3 months ago. "She stopped taking her medication," Judith observed. "Common with postpartum depression," Vanessa noted. "Women often feel they should be able to handle it on their own, or worry about the effects on breastfeeding." "Is she still breastfeeding?" According to Oliver, she stopped when Chloe was about 2 months old. He's been formula feeding her since. The master bedroom told the rest of the story. The unmade bed, the darkened room with curtains perpetually drawn, clothes strewn about, all signs of someone who had ceased to function in normal daily life. On the nightstand sat a framed photo that caught Judith's attention. A much healthier-looking Diane holding newborn Chloe, with Ray's arm around her shoulders and Oliver standing proudly beside them. A family portrait from happier times, not so long ago. Depression doesn't typically develop overnight, Vanessa said, following Judith's gaze to the photograph. There must have been signs before the baby came. The factory closure hit a lot of families hard, Judith replied. Add in a new baby, postpartum hormones, financial stress. It's a perfect storm, and an 8-year-old left to weather it alone. Vanessa's tone was matter-of-fact, but her expression revealed the same concern Judith felt. Have you been able to reach any extended family members? Oliver mentioned a grandmother when I spoke with him. I'm still trying to track her down. Well, my preliminary assessment is clear. This home is not currently suitable for children. Vanessa sighed, the weariness of someone who'd seen too many similar situations evident in her voice. The question is what happens next. At Millhaven General, Oliver sat beside Chloe's crib, reading aloud from a picture book one of the nurses had given him. His voice rose and fell in animated tones that made the baby smile and coo, despite the IV in her tiny arm and the monitors surrounding her. She likes when I do different voices for each character, he explained to Judith when she entered the room. Especially the deep, bare voice. You're very good at it, Judith said, settling into the chair beside him. A natural storyteller. Pride flickered across his face before uncertainty returned. Is Ms. Torres at our apartment? Is she going to take us away? Directness seemed the kindest approach. She's assessing the situation, Oliver. And yes, there are concerns about whether your home is safe right now. His shoulders slumped, but he didn't seem surprised. Because of Mom's sad sickness and Dad not being around much. That's part of it. Where will we go? The question was asked with such resigned maturity that it broke Judith's heart all over again. I don't know yet, but I promise you that Chloe will receive the care she needs, and so will you. Oliver's gaze returned to his sister. We need to stay together. I promised her when she was born that I'd always protect her. Big brothers are supposed to keep their promises. Before Judith could respond, Dr. Landon appeared in the doorway. Ms. Winters, a word, please. In the hallway, the doctor's expression was grave. Diane Hayes has been admitted to the psychiatric ward. The initial assessment indicates severe postpartum depression that's evolved into major depressive disorder. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished herself. Has she said anything about the children? Only that Oliver handles everything. She seems to have completely dissociated from her maternal responsibilities. He hesitated. There's more. We found evidence of a recent suicide attempt, shallow cuts on her wrists. She's now on suicide watch. The news wasn't entirely surprising, given what Judith had observed, but it confirmed the severity of the situation. And Ray Hayes, left about 20 minutes ago, said he needed to sort some things out. Hospital security noted he seemed agitated. Alarm bells rang in Judith's mind. I should call Vanessa. She's still at the apartment. But before she could reach for her phone, rapid footsteps approached from down the corridor. Ray Hayes reappeared, his face flushed and his movements jerky with nervous energy. Ms. Winters, he said, his voice unnaturally controlled. Can I have a word? In private. Something about his demeanor raised Judith's suspicions, but she nodded, following him to a quiet corner of the hallway while signaling to a nearby security guard to remain alert. I've been thinking, Ray began, running a hand through his disheveled hair. This whole situation, it's gotten out of control. Diane needs help, I understand that now. But these CPS people, they don't understand our family. They'll split us up. Take my kids away. Mr. Hayes, the priority right now is ensuring your children's safety and well-being. Which is exactly my point. He leaned closer, dropping his voice. What if I took the kids to my mother's place in Vermont? Just until Diane gets better. My mom's good with kids. Oliver loves her. It would be temporary. The proposal set off immediate red flags. Any change in custody would need to go through proper channels with CPS approval. Ray's expression darkened. You people and your channels and approvals. This is my family we're talking about. You think some government system knows better than a father what his kids need? A father who's been absent while his 8-year-old son raises an infant? The words escaped before Judith could temper them. Ray's facade cracked, anger flashing across his features. You don't know what it's like, losing your job after 15 years, watching your wife fall apart, trying to keep a roof over everyone's heads. By gambling away what little money you had left? Judith regretted the confrontational tone even as she spoke, but Ray's plan had triggered her protective instincts. His fists clenched at his sides. I was trying to turn things around. One big win, that's all we needed. What your family needs is stability and support, Mr. Hayes. Not desperate gambles or hasty relocations. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in Ray's eyes. Then his shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. They're going to take my kids away, aren't they? That decision hasn't been made yet. But if you truly want what's best for Oliver and Chloe, you'll cooperate with CPS and demonstrate that you're committed to making the necessary changes. Ray stared at her for a long moment, then turned away without another word, striding toward the elevator with renewed purpose. Judith watched him go, unease settling in her stomach. Something about the interaction felt unfinished, as if Ray Hayes had made a decision he wasn't sharing. She pulled out her phone and called Vanessa. He's planning something, she said when the social worker answered. Mentioned taking the kids to his mother in Vermont. That's not happening, Vanessa replied firmly. I'm nearly finished here. The home assessment confirms what we suspected. This environment isn't suitable for children. I'm recommending emergency temporary placement while we evaluate options for the family. When will that happen? As soon as Chloe is cleared for discharge. Probably tomorrow. Judith glanced toward Oliver's room, where she could see him still reading to his sister. He's not going to take it well. They rarely do, Vanessa sighed. But it's for their safety. After ending the call, Judith stood for a moment, caught between professional duty and personal concerns. Her instincts told her Ray Hayes wasn't simply going to accept CPS intervention. The question was what he might do to prevent it. Oliver knew something was wrong the moment Judith returned to the room. He'd become adept at reading adults' expressions, a survival skill honed through months of navigating his parents' unpredictable states. What's happening? He asked immediately, setting aside the storybook. Your father was just here, Judith said, choosing honesty. He's worried about you and Chloe. Is he mad at me for bringing her to the hospital? The question revealed volumes about the dynamics Oliver had internalized, the assumption that seeking help would trigger anger rather than concern. No, Oliver. He understands you did the right thing. The boy looked unconvinced. Where is he now? He left to take care of some things. Oliver's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of things? Before Judith could formulate an answer, her phone rang. Vanessa again. He's here, the social worker said without preamble. Ray Hayes just arrived at the apartment. He's packing bags. For himself. For all of them, it looks like. Children's clothes, baby supplies. He seems to be in a hurry. Judith's concern deepened. I'll alert hospital security. He might try to take the children. As she ended the call, she found Oliver watching her intently, his expression far too knowing for his age. Dad's going to try to take us away, isn't he? He asked quietly. Why do you think that? Oliver shrugged. It's what he always says when things get bad, that we should go to Grandma's and start over. But we never do because Mom won't leave. Judith made a quick decision. Oliver, I need to speak with hospital security. Will you stay right here with Chloe? Don't leave this room for any reason. Okay? He nodded solemnly. I won't leave her. As Judith hurried toward the nurse's station, she glanced back to see Oliver standing protectively beside Chloe's crib, his small hand reaching through the rails to hold hers. The sight strengthened her resolve. These children had been failed by too many adults already. It wouldn't happen again on her watch. The next 2 hours passed in a tense state of vigilance. Hospital security was alerted to prevent Ray from removing either child from the premises. Vanessa returned from the Hayes apartment with troubling news. Ray had packed hastily and left with a duffel bag, telling a neighbor he was sorting things out before they take my kids. By mid-afternoon, there was still no sign of him. Diane, meanwhile, remained in the psychiatric ward, heavily sedated after becoming agitated during her initial assessment. The psychiatrist's preliminary diagnosis confirmed severe depression with possible psychotic features. "We're running out of daylight," Vanessa observed, checking her watch. "I need to make arrangements for the children's placement tonight." "You still haven't located any suitable relatives?" Judith asked. "The maternal grandmother is in a nursing home with advanced dementia. The paternal grandmother in Vermont exists, but Ray's brother says she's in her 80s and in poor health herself, not capable of caring for an infant and a traumatized 8-year-old. So foster care is the only option?" Vanessa nodded grimly. "For now. I've put in a request for them to be placed together, but with Chloe's medical needs." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Judith knew the reality of the system. Siblings were often separated due to the shortage of foster homes willing to take multiple children, especially when one had special needs. "There must be an alternative," Judith insisted. "A family member we've overlooked, or a close friend who could step in temporarily. If you know of someone, I'm all ears. Otherwise, I need to proceed with standard protocols." The conversation was interrupted by a nurse rushing toward them. "Ms. Winters, the Hayes boy, he's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "He was supposed to stay in his sister's room. He was there when I checked 15 minutes ago. Now the room's empty. The baby's still there, but the boy's nowhere to be found." Cold dread washed over Judith. "Check the security cameras. Now." The hospital's security office quickly became the center of activity as staff reviewed footage from the past 30 minutes. The monitors showed Oliver leaving Chloe's room, glancing furtively down the hallway, then making his way to the elevator. There, the security guard pointed. He got off on the ground floor, then headed toward the main entrance. The exterior camera caught Oliver exiting the hospital at 3:42 p.m., still wearing the same clothes he'd arrived in. No coat despite the freezing temperatures. He paused on the sidewalk, looked both ways, then hurried toward the parking area. The next camera picked him up approaching a familiar pickup truck, Ray's vehicle. "He's meeting his father," Judith realized aloud. Ray must have called him somehow. The footage showed Oliver climbing into the passenger side of the truck, which immediately pulled away, disappearing from the camera's view. "He's taking him to Vermont," Judith said. "We need to alert the police." But even as she spoke, a new alert came through on Vanessa's phone, a notification from the psychiatric ward. "It's Diane," she said, her expression grave. "She's attempted suicide again. They found her trying to hang herself with a bedsheet." The room fell silent as the full weight of the situation descended upon them. A family in complete freefall. A mother actively suicidal, a father fleeing with one child, another child left behind. "I'll handle the police report," Vanessa said firmly. "You stay with Chloe. She shouldn't be alone right now." Judith nodded, her mind racing. As she hurried back to the pediatric ward, she tried to make sense of Ray's actions. Why take Oliver but leave Chloe? The answer hit her with sudden clarity. Ray knew he couldn't care for an infant, especially one with medical needs. But Oliver, reliable, capable Oliver, was old enough to fend for himself, and perhaps even useful to have around. She found Chloe awake and fussing in her crib, as if sensing her brother's absence. The infant calmed somewhat when Judith picked her up, but her eyes continued to search the room. "We'll find him," Judith whispered, cradling Chloe against her shoulder. "I promise." 2 hours later, the police called with an update. Ray's truck had been spotted at a gas station 40 miles north of Millhaven, heading in the direction of Vermont. Officers were in pursuit, but had not yet intercepted the vehicle. "They're looking for a father and son together," the officer explained. "Should be a routine traffic stop once they catch up." But Judith's instincts told her nothing about this situation was routine. Ray Hayes was a desperate man making desperate choices. How would he react when cornered? Night had fallen over Millhaven, the temperature dropping with the darkness. In Chloe's hospital room, Judith maintained her vigil while Vanessa coordinated with authorities and continued searching for an appropriate emergency placement for both children. The foster home I had lined up can't take both of them, Vanessa admitted during a brief visit. And with Chloe's condition, she needs specialized care. What about temporary guardianship with someone familiar to them? Just until a more permanent arrangement can be made, Judith suggested. Do you have someone in mind? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Judith hesitated. Her apartment was small but adequate. She had experience with children from her social work days. Most importantly, she had already formed a connection with both Oliver and Chloe. Before she could respond, her phone rang, an unknown number. Ms. Winters, it's Oliver. Her heart skipped. Oliver, are you okay? Where are you? I'm with Dad. His voice was hushed, as if he didn't want to be overheard. We're at a motel. I don't know where exactly. Dad's in the bathroom. Are you safe? A pause. I think so, but Dad's acting weird. He keeps saying we're going to Grandma's, but he's driving in circles. And he made me leave Chloe behind. His voice cracked. I never leave Chloe. The police are looking for you, Oliver. They want to bring you back to Millhaven. Dad says they'll take us away from each other if we go back. Is that true? Judith weighed her next words carefully. I don't know for certain, but I promise I will do everything I can to keep you and Chloe together. Dad says nobody cares, that we'll get lost in the system. His voice dropped even lower. I think he's been drinking. There's bottles in the truck. Alarm coursed through Judith. An intoxicated Ray driving with Oliver was an even more dangerous situation than she'd feared. Oliver, can you see anything outside your room? A sign for the motel? Or nearby businesses? It's called the Pinewood Lodge. There's a big blue sign. The sound of a door opening came through the phone. I have to go. Dad's coming back. Oliver, wait. But the line went dead. Judith immediately called the police, relaying the new information. The Pinewood Lodge was a rundown motel about 60 miles north of Millhaven, a place known for renting rooms to transients and those looking to avoid questions. They'll send officers right away, she told Vanessa, who had returned during the call. But Ray's been drinking. If he panics, I should be there, Vanessa decided. When they find them, a familiar face might help defuse the situation. I'm coming with you. That's not protocol, Judith. Protocol isn't going to convince a frightened 8-year-old to trust strangers, especially if his father is being arrested in front of him. Vanessa studied her for a moment, then nodded. We'll take my car. The hospital can call us if there's any change with Diane or Chloe. As they prepared to leave, Judith gazed down at Chloe, now sleeping peacefully in her crib. The baby's improved color and steady breathing were positive signs. But Judith knew physical recovery was only one part of what these children needed. We'll bring your brother back, she whispered, gently touching Chloe's cheek. And then we'll figure out how to make things right. The Pinewood Lodge appeared through swirling snow flurries as Vanessa's car approached, its neon sign flickering weakly in the winter night. Police cruisers were already positioned around the building, their lights creating eerie blue patterns across the white landscape. A state trooper approached as they parked. We've located the room, he informed them. Number 12. The man's truck is parked outside, but he's not responding to knocks or calls. Has there been any sign of the boy? Judith asked anxiously. Not yet. We're preparing to breach the door if necessary. Vanessa showed her credentials. I'm the assigned caseworker. This is Judith Winters from Millhaven General, who has established rapport with the child. We'd like to be present when you make contact. The trooper hesitated, then nodded. Stay behind our officers. This man may be unstable. As they approached room 12, Judith felt a mounting sense of dread. The darkened window and silence from within suggested scenarios she didn't want to consider. The lead officer knocked forcefully. Mr. Hayes, this is the state police. We need you to open the door. Silence. Mr. Hayes, we know your son is with you. Please open the door so we can ensure everyone's safety. After another moment of silence, The officer signaled to his colleagues to prepare for forced entry. Just as they moved into position, a small voice called from inside. "Is Ms. Winters there?" "I'm here, Oliver," Judith called back, stepping forward despite the officer's warning gesture. "I'm right outside. Dad's asleep. He took a lot of pills with his beer. I can't wake him up." The officers exchanged alarmed glances. "Stand back, folks," the lead officer ordered, then turned to the door. "Oliver, we need you to open the door if you can. Or move away from it so we can come in." "I'm scared," came the small voice. "I know you are," Judith called. "But we're here to help you and your dad. Can you unlock the door for me?" A long pause, then the sound of small feet padding across a floor. The lock clicked, and the door opened a few inches. Oliver's pale face appeared in the gap, his eyes wide with fear. "Don't hurt my dad," he pleaded. "He's sick, like Mom." "No one's going to hurt him," Judith promised, crouching to his level. "The police are here to help. Can you let us in now?" Oliver stepped back, allowing the door to swing open fully. The scene inside confirmed Judith's worst fears. Ray Hayes lay sprawled on one of the two beds, unconscious. Empty beer cans surrounded him, along with an open pill bottle. His breathing was shallow and labored. The officers immediately rushed to assess him, calling for paramedics. Oliver stood frozen by the door, his small body trembling. Judith approached him slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Oliver, are you hurt?" He shook his head, eyes fixed on his father. "Is he going to die?" "The police are helping him," she said, gently guiding him away from the scene. "The doctors will do everything they can." "He kept saying he ruined everything," Oliver whispered. "That he was a failure as a dad. That Mom and Chloe would be better off without him. That at least I was old enough to understand." The words chilled Judith to the bone. They sounded like the prelude to a murder-suicide pact. Had Ray intended to take Oliver with him? Or had the boy's presence caused him to hesitate? "Did your father hurt you in any way?" she asked carefully. Oliver shook his head again. "He just cried a lot, and kept saying he was sorry. Then he took those pills and fell asleep. I tried to wake him up, but he wouldn't move. That's when I found his phone and called you." Vanessa approached, having consulted with the officers. "The paramedics are on their way. They think it's an overdose, possibly intentional. They'll transport him to the nearest hospital for treatment." "And Oliver? He'll need to be examined too as a precaution." Then, she hesitated, glancing at the boy. "We'll proceed with emergency placement tonight." Oliver's hand found Judith's, clutching it tightly. "Can I go back to Chloe? Please." The simple request, so focused on his sister rather than himself even after what he'd just experienced, brought tears to Judith's eyes. "Yes," she said firmly, looking at Vanessa. "He needs to be with his sister right now." Vanessa nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "I'll make the arrangements. We can transport him back to Millhaven General for his examination." As the paramedics arrived and began working on Ray, Judith led Oliver outside to Vanessa's car. In the back seat, away from the chaos, she wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Oliver, why did you go with your father? You must have known he was planning to take you away." The boy stared at his hands for a long moment before answering. "He called me, said if I didn't come, they'd put Chloe in a different home from me. That the only way we could stay together was if we went to Grandma's." He looked up, eyes brimming with tears. "But then he left Chloe behind anyway, and I knew he was lying." The betrayal this child had suffered, from both parents, from the adults meant to protect him, was staggering. Yet somehow he'd maintained his core of compassion and responsibility. "I'm so sorry you've had to deal with all of this," Judith said softly. "None of it is your fault. What's going to happen now?" His voice was small but steady, the question of a child who had learned to prepare for the worst. Judith chose her next words with care, wanting to offer hope without false promises. "Your father is very sick, like your mother. They both need help. That might take some time. Until they're better, you and Chloe need a safe place to stay. Together. The word held all his fear and longing. I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen, Judith promised. And in that moment, she knew exactly what she needed to do. Dawn was breaking over Millhaven when they finally returned to the hospital. Ray Hayes had been admitted to the ICU at a hospital near the motel. His condition critical but stable. Diane remained under observation in the psychiatric ward, now with a formal diagnosis of major depressive disorder with suicidal ideation. Oliver, examined and cleared by a pediatrician, had finally succumbed to exhaustion. He slept curled in a chair beside Chloe's crib, his hand reaching through the rails to maintain contact with his sister even in sleep. Judith watched them from the doorway, her mind made up. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, she told Vanessa, who stood beside her. About temporary guardianship. Vanessa studied her knowingly. You're considering it. Not considering anymore. I want to apply. For both of them. It won't be easy. You're single, you work night shifts, and you have no prior relationship with the family. I've established rapport with Oliver. I understand what they've been through, and my schedule can be adjusted. Judith took a deep breath. I know it's unconventional, but these children need stability now, not promises of perfect placements that might never materialize. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, weighing the proposal. There would be home studies, background checks, interviews. I'm familiar with the process. I was a social worker, remember? And you understand this would be temporary? The goal is still family reunification if the parents can demonstrate substantial progress. Of course. Vanessa nodded slowly. I'll submit the recommendation. It's unorthodox, but given the circumstances, it might be the best option for maintaining sibling bonds while ensuring appropriate care. She smiled slightly. Something tells me you've been considering this longer than just tonight. Judith couldn't deny it. Something about these children had resonated with her from that first night in the emergency room, perhaps because she recognized in Oliver's determined self-sufficiency echoes of her own childhood, when she'd become a caretaker far too young. They deserve a chance, she said simply, to be children, not just survivors. In the hospital room, Oliver stirred slightly, his eyes opening to find Judith watching. For a moment, he looked disoriented, then remembrance flooded back. The motel, his father, the police. Chloe, he whispered anxiously. She's right here, Judith assured him, moving to his side. She's doing much better. The doctor says she might be discharged tomorrow. Relief washed over his face. Then came the inevitable next question. Where will we go? Judith crouched beside his chair, meeting his eyes directly. I have an idea about that. It would be temporary until your parents are better. But you and Chloe would stay together. With me. Oliver's expression shifted from confusion to cautious hope. At your house. At my apartment. It's not very big, but there's a spare room that could fit both of you. And I'm pretty good at making pancakes on Sundays. The reference to what he'd mentioned about his father brought a flicker of a smile to Oliver's face. There and gone in an instant. What about Mom and Dad? They'll be in hospitals for a while, getting the help they need. But you'll be able to visit them when the doctors say it's okay. Oliver considered this, his young face solemn with a child's version of deliberation. Would we have to change schools? No. We'd make sure you can keep going to the same school. And you'd help me take care of Chloe? The question broke Judith's heart anew. This child, still instinctively assuming caretaking responsibilities even as adults finally stepped up. Oliver, she said gently, if you come to stay with me, my job would be to take care of both of you. You wouldn't have to be the grown-up anymore. He looked genuinely confused by this concept. But who would make sure Chloe gets her bottles at the right times? And check if her diaper is wet? And sing her the goodnight song when she can't sleep? I would do those things, Judith explained. And you could help if you wanted to, but only because you wanted to, not because you had to. Your job would be to go to school, play with friends, do your homework, and just be 8 years old. Oliver's brow furrowed as he processed this strange new paradigm. What if? He began hesitantly. What if I don't remember how to just be a kid? The simple, devastating question hung in the air between them. Judith reached out, gently taking his small hand in hers. "Then we'll figure it out together," she promised. Day by day. For the first time since she'd met him, Oliver's carefully maintained composure crumbled completely. His face crumpled, and he began to cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears he'd shed before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from some long-buried place within him. Judith pulled him into her arms, holding him as the storm of emotion broke over him. She felt his small body shake with the force of his grief and relief intermingled, the weight of months of pretending to be strong finally released. In the crib beside them, Chloe woke and began to whimper, distressed by her brother's cries. Without thinking, Judith reached over with one arm and gently stroked the baby's head, while still holding Oliver with the other. "It's okay," she murmured to both of them. "Everything's going to be okay now." Outside the window, the first true light of dawn broke over Millhaven. The winter sun, pale but persistent, pushed through the clouds that had shrouded the town for days. It cast long shadows but also illuminated possibilities, the promise of warmth to come eventually, if they could just hold on through the cold. In that moment, Judith made another silent promise, not just to keep these children safe, but to help them heal, to show Oliver that strength didn't always mean carrying burdens alone, to ensure Chloe grew up knowing both security and joy, and perhaps, in time, to help their parents find their way back to wholeness, for their children's sake if not for their own. It would not be easy. The road ahead would be long and complex, with bureaucratic hurdles, emotional setbacks, and no guarantees of permanent happy endings. But in this moment, with two children who had survived the unthinkable now beginning to trust her, Judith felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Clear, unambiguous purpose. Oliver's sobs gradually subsided, but he didn't pull away from the embrace. Instead, he leaned into it, perhaps for the first time allowing himself to be comforted rather than being the comforter. "Ms. Winters?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Yes, Oliver? I'm really tired." 3 simple words that conveyed so much exhaustion, yes, but also surrender. The acknowledgement that perhaps, finally, he could rest. "I know," she said softly. "And that's okay. You don't have to be strong right now." As if given permission at last, Oliver's eyelids grew heavy. Within minutes, he was asleep against her shoulder, the lines of worry temporarily erased from his young face. Vanessa, who had witnessed the entire interaction from the doorway, approached quietly. "I'll start the paperwork," she said, her professional veneer softening. "This might actually work." Judith nodded, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. "It has to," she whispered, "for both of them." In her crib, Chloe had settled again, one tiny hand clutching the edge of her blanket, the other reaching instinctively toward her brother even in sleep. 2 children, bound together by circumstance and survival, finally finding a harbor in the storm. Outside, Millhaven continued to wake, its residents going about their daily lives unaware of the small drama of hope unfolding in room 417. But inside that room, a new kind of family was beginning to take shape, fragile, temporary, unconventional, but real nonetheless. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. February in Millhaven brought no relief from winter's grip. If anything, the cold deepened, settling into the bones of the town like an unwelcome guest who had forgotten its departure date. Icicles hung from eaves like crystal daggers, and the river that gave the town its name slowed to a sluggish crawl beneath a thickening sheet of ice. Inside Judith Winter's apartment, however, warmth prevailed. Not just the physical warmth from radiators working overtime, but something more essential, the warmth of safety slowly being recognized, of trust cautiously extended. "Is that enough blocks?" Judith asked, setting another wooden cube on the tottering tower that Oliver was constructing on the living room floor. The boy studied the structure with serious concentration. 2 weeks had passed since the night at the Pinewood Lodge, 2 weeks since he and Chloe had come to stay in Judith's modest 2-bedroom apartment. In that time, Oliver had maintained his careful vigilance over his sister, but Judith had begun to see glimpses of the child beneath the caretaker. One more, he decided, accepting the block she offered. Then it'll be as tall as the tower in the book. The book in question lay open beside him, a children's story about architects that Judith had picked up from the library. Oliver's fascination with buildings and structures had emerged gradually, a small window into his interests beyond caring for Chloe. From her play mat nearby, Chloe gurgled and kicked, reaching for the colorful mobile hanging above her. Her physical recovery had been swift once proper nutrition and medication were consistently administered. The pediatrician had pronounced her remarkably resilient, a quality Judith suspected ran in the Hayes family. When can we visit Mom again? Oliver asked, carefully placing the final block on his tower. Tomorrow afternoon, Judith reminded him. Remember? After school. He nodded, but his expression remained serious. Their first visit to see Diane at the psychiatric facility had been difficult, though the doctors had prepared them, explaining that Diane was heavily medicated and might not seem like herself. The reality of seeing his mother so subdued and disconnected had clearly shaken Oliver. He'd been quiet for hours afterward. And Dad? The question was asked with deliberate casualness, but Judith heard the underlying anxiety. Not yet, honey. He's still at the rehabilitation center in Burlington. Ray Hayes had survived his overdose but faced a long recovery. Not just from the physical effects, but from the alcohol dependency that had contributed to his breakdown. But we can call him tonight, if you'd like. Oliver shrugged, his focus returning to the tower. Maybe. Judith respected his ambivalence. The boy's relationship with his father was complicated, threads of affection tangled with betrayal, longing with fear. The therapist Oliver saw twice weekly had stressed the importance of allowing him to process these feelings at his own pace. A soft chime from Judith's phone interrupted the moment. That must be Ms. Torres, she said, checking the message. She's coming up. Oliver's shoulders tensed slightly. Though Vanessa had been nothing but kind, her official role as their caseworker made her visits sources of anxiety. Each one carried the unspoken question. Would this arrangement continue, or would today bring news of another change? The knock at the door came moments later. Vanessa entered, bringing with her a blast of cold air and the brisk efficiency that characterized her professional demeanor. Good afternoon, she greeted them, unwinding her scarf. Quite the blizzard brewing out there. We were just building towers, Judith explained, clearing space at the small dining table. Can I get you some tea? Please. Vanessa settled at the table, opening her ever-present tablet. Her eyes softened as she looked at Oliver. That's quite the architectural achievement. The boy managed a small smile but said nothing, moving to sit beside Chloe's play mat as if to shield her from potential threats. While Judith prepared tea, Vanessa conducted her standard assessment, checking the apartment's condition, reviewing the children's progress, discussing any concerns that had arisen since her last visit. The formality of these evaluations had gradually decreased as weeks passed with no significant issues. Chloe's gained nearly a pound since discharge, Judith reported, setting mugs on the table. The pediatrician is very pleased with her progress. And Oliver? How was the school meeting? Positive overall. His teachers say he's engaging more in class, though he's still reluctant during group activities. His academic performance remains impressive. Oliver listened to this discussion of his life with the careful attention of someone accustomed to adults making decisions about his fate. He'd positioned himself between the women and Chloe, one hand absently stroking his sister's foot while his eyes tracked their conversation. I have some updates, Vanessa said, taking a sip of tea. First, the court has officially approved your temporary guardianship for another 60 days. Relief washed over Judith. Though she'd known the arrangement was likely to continue, the legal confirmation provided security they all needed. Second, Vanessa continued, Diane Hayes has been responding well to treatment. Her doctors report significant improvement with the new medication regimen. That's wonderful news. Judith glanced at Oliver, who had perked up noticeably. She's asked about transitioning to the outpatient program within the next month, with supervised visitation rights. Vanessa paused, choosing her next words carefully. Which brings me to the third update. Ray Hayes has completed detox and the initial phase of his rehabilitation program. He's requesting family therapy sessions with Oliver. Tension immediately returned to Oliver's small frame. Would I have to go there? To Vermont? No, Vanessa assured him. If approved, the sessions would be conducted virtually at first. And only when you feel ready. Oliver nodded, relief evident in his posture, though uncertainty remained in his eyes. Does he know about Chloe? That she's okay? Yes. Both your parents receive regular updates about your welfare. A moment of silence fell as Oliver processed this information. Then, with the directness of children, he asked the question that loomed largest. Are we going to have to go back to the apartment? Vanessa and Judith exchanged glances. It was the question that haunted every conversation about the Hayes family's future, what reunification would look like, and whether it was truly in the children's best interests. Not anytime soon, Vanessa answered honestly. Your parents still have significant progress to make before reunification would be considered. For now, this is your home. Oliver seemed to accept this answer, though Judith knew the uncertainty continued to weigh on him. Children in the system lived with a particular kind of instability. Even when physically safe, emotional security remained elusive as long as their permanent situation remained unresolved. Why don't you finish your tower while Ms. Torres and I talk a bit more? Judith suggested gently. With obvious reluctance, Oliver returned to his blocks, though he positioned himself to keep both women in his sightline. Vanessa lowered her voice. There's something else. The maternal grandmother passed away last week. The inheritance isn't substantial, but there's a life insurance policy that named Diane as beneficiary. It should provide some financial stability once she's released from treatment. That might make a significant difference, Judith observed. Financial strain had been a major contributor to the family's collapse. Potentially, but Ray's gambling debts remain an issue, and their housing situation is complicated. They're months behind on rent for the Riverdale apartment. The unspoken reality hung between them. Even with the best possible outcomes, the Hayes family faced a difficult path forward, and the children, caught in the middle, would continue to bear the emotional burden of that uncertainty. As if sensing the weight of the conversation, Chloe began to fuss. Oliver immediately abandoned his tower, reaching for his sister with practiced ease. She's probably hungry, he said, lifting her with a gentleness that still amazed Judith. It's almost time for her bottle. I can take her, Judith offered, rising from the table. For a moment, Oliver hesitated, the old instinct to maintain control warring with his gradually developing trust. Then, in a small but significant gesture, he handed Chloe to Judith. The formula's already measured in the fridge, he said, unable to completely relinquish his caretaking role. And she likes the blue bottle best. I remember, Judith assured him, cradling Chloe against her shoulder. The baby settled almost immediately, recognizing the security of these arms that had become familiar over the past weeks. Vanessa watched this exchange with professional assessment but also genuine warmth. You've established a good routine here, she observed. We're figuring it out day by day, Judith replied, heating Chloe's bottle with practiced efficiency while still holding her. It helps that Oliver is the most organized 8-year-old I've ever met. Almost 9, Oliver corrected automatically, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. It was these small moments, the flickers of normal childhood assertiveness, the occasional smiles, the gradually decreasing vigilance, that gave Judith hope. Oliver was beginning, in tiny increments, to remember how to be a child. Later that evening, after Chloe had been bathed and settled in her crib, Judith found Oliver sitting on his bed, staring at his father's phone number written on a slip of paper. The boy had been unusually quiet since Vanessa's visit, clearly processing the news about his parents. You don't have to call if you don't want to, Judith said, sitting beside him. Oliver continued staring at the paper. I don't know what to say to him. You could just listen if that's easier. Or we could wait until another day. He shook his head. No. I want to know if he's really getting better. There was skepticism in his voice, the wariness of a child who had heard too many broken promises. Would you like me to dial for you? I can stay while you talk or give you privacy. After a moment's consideration, Oliver handed her the paper. Stay, please. Judith dialed the number and put the call on speaker. After 3 rings, Ray's voice came through, thinner than Judith remembered, hesitant. Hello, Dad? It's Oliver. Oliver. The genuine joy in Ray's voice was unmistakable. How are you, buddy? How's your sister? We're okay. Oliver's response was guarded, his body tense beside Judith. Chloe's getting bigger. She can almost sit up by herself now. That's great. Really great. Ray paused, and Judith could hear the effort it took him to maintain composure. I miss you both so much. Oliver said nothing, his small face a mask of conflicting emotions. I'm doing better, Ray continued into the silence. The program here, it's helping, teaching me how to handle things without, drinking. Are you coming back to Millhaven? Oliver asked, the question emerging from whatever tangle of hopes and fears he carried. Eventually, I have more work to do here first. Learning how to be a better dad. You were a good dad before, Oliver said suddenly, his voice catching. Before the factory closed. Remember when you taught me to fish? And we built that model rocket. The memory seemed to catch Ray off guard. Yeah, I remember. His voice thickened. I want to be that dad again, Oliver. I'm trying. I really am. Mom's getting better too, Oliver offered. We visited her yesterday. She actually smiled when she saw Chloe. That's good to hear. The relief in Ray's voice was palpable. Despite everything, Judith sensed he genuinely cared for his wife. Mr. Hayes, Judith interjected gently. Oliver and Chloe are doing well. Their pediatrician is pleased with their progress, and Oliver's school reports are excellent. Ms. Winters. Ray's tone was difficult to read, a mixture of gratitude and shame. Thank you for everything. For taking care of them when we couldn't. They're remarkable children, she replied simply. An awkward silence fell, broken finally by Ray. Oliver, I know I messed up. What I did at that motel. Trying to take you away like that. I wasn't thinking straight. I was scared and selfish, and I put you in danger. I'm so sorry. It was the first direct acknowledgement of that night, the first explicit apology. Oliver's shoulders trembled slightly under the weight of it. I thought you were going to die, he whispered. Like you wanted to. No, buddy. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I never wanted to leave you. Never. The pills, the drinking. It was all stupid, desperate stuff because I couldn't face how badly I'd failed you all. Ray's voice broke. But I'm facing it now. Every day. And I'm going to keep facing it until I can be the father you deserve. Oliver wiped hastily at his eyes. Promise. I promise. And this time I'm going to keep it. The conversation continued for a few more minutes. Awkward at times, emotional at others, but representing a crucial first step in rebuilding what had been broken. When they finally said goodbye, Oliver seemed both drained and somehow lighter. He sounded different, he observed, setting the phone aside. Less angry. Recovery changes people, Judith explained. He's learning healthier ways to handle his feelings. Oliver considered this. Do you think they'll really get better? Both of them? It was the question that haunted all their interactions, the hope and fear that shaped every discussion of the future. Judith chose honesty over false reassurance. Recovery isn't a straight line, Oliver. There will be good days and difficult ones. But yes, I believe they're both genuinely trying to get better. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. What they're going through doesn't erase what you experienced. Your feelings about that are valid no matter what happens next. He nodded, processing this with the serious consideration that characterized all his interactions with difficult truths. Then, with childlike directness, can we have hot chocolate? With the little marshmallows. The simple request, so normal, so age-appropriate, warmed Judith's heart. Absolutely. March arrived with the first hints of thaw, icicles dripping during daylight hours, patches of grass emerging from melting snowbanks, the river beginning to stir beneath its thinning ice cover. In Millhaven, as in much of New England, spring never arrived in a straightforward fashion but rather in a series of advances and retreats, each slightly more convincing than the last. At Judith's apartment, a similar thawing was underway. Oliver, approaching his 9th birthday, had begun to shed some of his hypervigilance. He still checked on Chloe multiple times each night, still maintained his careful lists and schedules, but he'd also started to engage in activities solely for himself, joining the science club at school, spending time with a classmate who lived in Judith's building, losing himself in books about architecture and engineering. Chloe, now 7 months old, had transformed from the sickly infant of that first hospital visit into a robust baby with chubby cheeks and an infectious laugh. She rolled over with determination, experimenting with sounds that edged closer to words each day. Her preference for Oliver remained strong, her face lighting up whenever he entered a room, but she had formed secure attachments to Judith as well, happily reaching for her when comfort or care was needed. The temporary guardianship arrangement had been extended again, providing a bubble of stability that allowed for healing. Diane continued to make progress in her treatment program, participating in twice-weekly supervised visits that grew less strained with each passing week. Ray remained in Vermont but had begun weekend visits to Millhaven, carefully monitored and initially conducted in the family visitation room at the social services building. The question of reunification loomed on the horizon, not imminent but no longer theoretical. The possibility brought with it a complex mix of emotions for everyone involved, perhaps most acutely for Judith herself. She hadn't anticipated how deeply these children would weave themselves into the fabric of her life. The daily routines, school lunches and bedtime stories, doctor's appointments and playground visits, had transformed her apartment from the quiet refuge of a single woman into a home filled with the organized chaos of family life. Somewhere along the way, temporary caregiving had become something much more essential. These thoughts occupied her mind as she prepared for a significant milestone: the first home visit with both parents present. Diane had progressed to weekend passes from her treatment facility, and Ray had been approved for an extended stay in Millhaven. For the first time since the crisis that had separated them, the Hayes family would spend an afternoon together in what was now, however temporarily, the children's home. "Is the cake done yet?" Oliver asked, entering the kitchen where Judith was arranging sandwich ingredients. "Almost. 5 more minutes." She'd been teaching him to bake, a practical skill but also a creative outlet that he approached with characteristic seriousness. "I put out the good plates," he reported, "and I showed Chloe the picture of Mom and Dad so she remembers them." The comment revealed his lingering worry that his sister, whose memory at this age was still developing, might not recognize their parents after the weeks of separation. It was one of many concerns he carried about the imminent reunion. "That was thoughtful," Judith said. "Are you feeling ready for today?" Oliver shrugged, his go-to gesture when emotions became too complicated to express. "I guess." He picked up a cucumber slice, nibbling it thoughtfully. "What if they don't like it here?" "What do you mean?" "Our apartment was always messy and noisy when Dad was mad. It's different here." Judith understood the unspoken question. Would his parents fit into this new life he'd begun to build? Would their presence disrupt the security he'd finally started to feel? "Different doesn't mean bad," she said gently. "Your parents are working very hard to create a better home for your family, wherever that ends up being. Today is just about spending time together, not making any big decisions." Oliver nodded, though uncertainty remained in his expression. "What happens after they get better? Will we have to leave?" It was the question Judith had been dreading, the one she struggled with professionally and personally. The goal of the foster system was family reunification whenever possible. Both Diane and Ray were making significant progress in their respective treatment programs. If they continued on this path, demonstrated stability, and secured appropriate housing, the courts would likely return custody to them. But the thought of Oliver and Chloe leaving, of sending them back into an environment that had failed them so profoundly, even a supposedly improved version, filled Judith with dread that she knew crossed the boundaries of professional distance. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," she said finally. "For now, this is your home for as long as you need it to be." Before Oliver could press further, the oven timer chimed. He hurried to help her remove the cake, a simple chocolate one he'd helped mix and measure for, distracted momentarily from the weighty questions about his future. As they frosted the cake together, Judith reminded herself of the principles that had guided her social work career. Children belonged with their biological families when safe and possible. The system was meant to be a temporary intervention, not a permanent solution. Her role was to facilitate healing and reunification, not to substitute herself for these children's parents. But in her heart, a different truth had taken root. One less professional, more human. She loved these children, not abstractly, as wards of the system or clients of her care, but concretely, specifically, with all the fierce protectiveness that love entailed. Somewhere in the midnight feedings and homework help, the nightmare comforting and proud refrigerator art displays, they had become something dangerously close to hers. The doorbell's chime interrupted her thoughts. Oliver froze, the frosting knife suspended over the cake. Fear, hope, and anxiety played across his features in rapid succession. "Ready?" Judith asked gently. He set down the knife with deliberate care, wiped his hands on a towel, and straightened his shirt. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, the child retreating behind the careful mask of composure she'd first witnessed in the emergency room months ago. "Ready," he confirmed, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. When Judith opened the door, she found Diane and Ray Hayes standing awkwardly in the hallway. They were both visibly changed from when she'd last seen them together. Diane had gained healthy weight, her hair styled and her eyes clear and focused where they had once been vacant. Ray stood straighter, the bloated puffiness of alcoholism fading from his features. His hands steady where they had once trembled. "Ms. Winters," Diane greeted her, formal despite the circumstances. "Thank you for having us. Please come in, and call me Judith." They entered with the careful steps of visitors hyper-aware of their guest status in what had been, in a different context, a professional's intervention in their family. The power dynamics were complicated, the emotions beneath them even more so. "Oliver's in the kitchen," Judith began, but before she could finish, the boy appeared in the doorway. For a moment, he simply stared at his parents, as if confirming that the people before him matched the memories he carried. Then, with a small sound that might have been a sob, he rushed forward. Diane crouched to meet him, enveloping him in an embrace that spoke of months of separation and regret. "My brave boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My wonderful, brave boy." Ray stood awkwardly to the side, uncertainty evident in his posture. But then Oliver reached out one arm toward him, and he too joined the embrace, the family forming a tight circle of reconnection. Judith stepped back, allowing them this moment. Her role was to facilitate, not to intrude. But as she watched, a complex ache formed in her chest. Joy for the healing evident in this reunion. Grief for what it might eventually mean for her own relationship with these children. The moment was broken by Chloe's babbling from the playpen in the living room. At the sound, Diane lifted her head, tears streaming freely down her face. "Chloe, can I?" "Of course," Judith said gently. "She's been waiting to see you." The reunion between mother and infant was equally emotional. Chloe studied Diane's face with serious concentration before breaking into a gummy smile of recognition. When Diane lifted her, the baby settled against her shoulder with the contentment of returning to something familiar and safe. "She's gotten so big," Diane marveled, running a gentle hand over Chloe's head. "And look at all that hair now. She can almost sit up by herself," Oliver reported, pride evident in his voice. "And she likes mashed bananas best." "You've taken such good care of her," Diane said, fresh tears welling. "Both of you have," she added, glancing at Judith with complicated gratitude. The afternoon unfolded with a delicate blend of joy and awkwardness. They shared the lunch Judith and Oliver had prepared, exchanged updates on Chloe's development, carefully navigated conversations about treatment programs and recovery milestones. Beneath the surface pleasantries ran deeper currents, questions unasked, grief unexpressed, futures uncertain. After lunch, Judith suggested that the Hayes family might appreciate some time alone together. "I have errands to run," she offered. "I could be gone for an hour or so." The suggestion was met with visible relief, especially from Ray, who had maintained a careful formality in Judith's presence. Some conversations needed to happen without the witness who had seen their family at its worst. "Are you sure that's okay?" Diane asked, her eyes conveying deeper questions about trust and readiness. "Of course. This is supposed to be family time." Judith gathered her purse and coat. "Oliver knows how to reach me if you need anything." As she prepared to leave, Oliver approached her, anxiety evident in his expression. "You're coming back, right?" The question carried echoes of abandonment, fears that no child should have to bear. Judith crouched to his level, meeting his eyes directly. "Absolutely. 1 hour, no more. I promise." He nodded, seemingly reassured, then lowered his voice. "They seem better. Really better." "They do," she agreed, feeling the bittersweetness of his observation. His parents' improvement was everything they had hoped for, and everything that might eventually separate them. When Judith returned exactly 1 hour later, she found a transformed atmosphere in the apartment. The initial stiffness had dissipated, replaced by something approaching normalcy. Ray was on the floor with Chloe, encouraging her attempts to crawl. Diane and Oliver sat at the table, heads bent together over one of his school projects. They looked up at her entrance, and Judith was struck by their resemblance. The same serious eyes, the same thoughtful expression. "We were just talking about Oliver's science fair project," Diane explained. "He's designing a bridge structure." "It's impressive work," Judith confirmed. "His teacher thinks it might win this year." Pride shone in Diane's eyes, simple maternal pride without the cloud of depression that had dulled her responses to her children for so long. It was a beautiful sight, and one that underscored the complexity of Judith's position. Everything she wanted for these children was unfolding before her. Their parents healing, reconnecting, reclaiming their roles, and yet each step forward carried them one step closer to leaving her life. The visit continued for another hour, ending with promises of another gathering soon. As Diane embraced Oliver goodbye, she whispered something in his ear that made him nod seriously. Ray awkwardly shook Judith's hand, managed to express gratitude without meeting her eyes directly, and then crouched to Oliver's level. "I'm proud of you, buddy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For taking care of your sister, for doing so well in school, for everything. You're the best kid a father could ask for." Oliver's face registered shock at the praise, then something close to wonder. "Really? Really?" Ray pulled him into a tight hug. "And I'm going to keep working hard so I can be the dad you deserve. I promise." After they left, Oliver was unusually quiet, processing the emotional weight of the afternoon. He helped clean up without being asked, his movements methodical as always, but his mind clearly elsewhere. "They seemed really different," he observed finally, as they loaded the dishwasher together. "Better." "Yes," Judith agreed. "Treatment is helping them both. Mom said." He paused, rearranging a fork with unnecessary precision. "Mom said they're looking for an apartment. A new one, not at Riverdale. She said maybe in a few months, if everything keeps going well, we might—" He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Move back with them?" Judith finished gently. Oliver nodded, his expression conflicted. "I want them to get better. I really do. But it's complicated," Judith supplied, understanding the confusion he couldn't articulate. "You can be happy they're recovering and still feel uncertain about changes in your life. Both things can be true at once." He considered this, then asked the question that clearly weighed heaviest on him. "If we go back to live with them, will we still see you?" The question pierced Judith's heart. In the ideal foster care scenario, her role would gradually diminish as the family healed. Practical realities and professional boundaries dictated a gentle separation once reunification occurred. But the thought of these children disappearing from her life felt like contemplating the loss of a limb. "I will always be here for you," she promised, choosing words with care. "The exact arrangements would depend on many factors, but I'm not going to vanish from your life, Oliver." He nodded, seemingly reassured, though a shadow of doubt remained in his eyes. "Chloe would miss you," he said, his characteristic deflection of his own emotions onto his sister. I would miss her too. And you. This simple truth hung between them, the acknowledgement of bonds formed that transcended professional relationships. Whatever happened next, they would need to navigate uncharted emotional territory together. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Judith sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal pad. On it, she had begun to outline contingency plans, proposals for a gradual transition if reunification proceeded, suggestions for continued involvement in a supportive capacity, options that might allow her to remain connected to the children she had come to love. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Vanessa Torres. Sorry to call so late, the social worker began, but I wanted to update you on some developments before our meeting tomorrow. Concerning the Hayes family? Yes. Ray has been offered a position at a construction firm in Millhaven, conditional on his completion of the rehabilitation program, of course. And Diane's psychiatrist is recommending a step down to outpatient treatment within the next month. These were positive developments, exactly what they'd been working toward. Yet Judith felt a knot form in her stomach. That's wonderful news, she managed. It is, Vanessa agreed. But it accelerates our timeline. If they both maintain this progress and secure appropriate housing, we could be looking at family reunification by early summer. Summer just a few months away. The timeline felt simultaneously distant and far too soon. The children will need a careful transition plan, Judith said, her professional training providing words when her personal feelings threatened to overwhelm her, especially Oliver. He's just beginning to feel secure here. Agreed. That's why I wanted to discuss this with you before meeting with the Hayes. Your insight into the children's needs will be crucial in designing an appropriate transition. After ending the call, Judith returned to her legal pad, now with a more urgent purpose. If she had only a few months left with these children, she would ensure they were prepared in every possible way for the changes ahead, and perhaps in the process prepare herself as well. Outside her window, the frozen river was beginning to break up, sheets of ice cracking and shifting with the strengthening current beneath. It was a fitting metaphor for what was happening within her apartment. The solid ground of routine giving way to the movement of change, inevitable and necessary but disruptive nonetheless. In Oliver's room, a nightlight cast soft shadows across the sleeping boy's face. Judith stood in the doorway, watching his chest rise and fall with peaceful breaths. On the wall beside his bed hung a calendar where he meticulously marked off each day, a habit formed during his months of assuming adult responsibilities. Now it served a different purpose, tracking progress toward his parents' recovery, counting down to whatever came next. In the crib beside his bed, Chloe slept soundly, one small hand clutching the stuffed rabbit Judith had given her. The siblings had insisted on sharing a room despite the availability of separate spaces. Another testament to the bond forged through adversity. As Judith watched them, a resolution formed within her. Whatever came next, whether reunification proceeded as planned or encountered unexpected obstacles, she would ensure these children never again felt abandoned or unsupported. The exact nature of her role might change, but her commitment to their well-being would not. In a system often characterized by impersonal processes and institutional limitations, she would be the exception. The adult who remained constant while others came and went, who kept promises others broke, who created continuity where there had been only disruption. It wasn't the outcome she had been trained to facilitate as a social worker. It wasn't the clean separation that foster care protocols recommended. But it was the only option her heart would accept. As spring continued its halting advance outside, Judith returned to her legal pad, planning not for an ending but for a transformation. From temporary guardian to something as yet undefined but no less essential in the lives of two children who had taught her more about family than 25 years of professional experience ever could. The path ahead was uncertain, complicated by legal parameters and professional boundaries. But one thing was clear. These children had found a home with her, not just in the physical sense of shelter and provision, but in the deeper sense of unconditional belonging. Whatever form their relationship took moving forward, that essential truth would remain. Spring arrived fully in Millhaven by mid-April, the town transformed by new growth and warming temperatures. The river that had spent months locked beneath ice now flowed freely, its currents carrying away the last remnants of winter. Trees that had stood as bare skeletons against gray skies now burst with tender green buds. The transformation was gradual and then suddenly complete, as if the town had collectively exhaled after holding its breath through the long, difficult winter. Oliver's 9th birthday fell on one of those perfect spring days, the kind that promised summer while still maintaining the freshness of the new season. Judith had planned a small celebration at the community park, the first real birthday party Oliver had experienced in years. "Do you think he'll like the decorations?" Diane Hayes asked anxiously, smoothing the plastic tablecloth with restless hands. She'd been released to outpatient care 3 weeks earlier and was staying at a transitional housing facility near the hospital. Today marked her first unsupervised outing with the children, a significant milestone in her treatment plan. "He'll love them," Judith assured her, hanging balloons from the pavilion's rafters. "Especially the architecture theme. He's been talking about skyscrapers all week." Nearby, Ray was assembling a portable grill, his movements careful and deliberate. 7 weeks sober had restored much of his physical health, though the emotional healing remained a work in progress. He attended daily meetings and had secured part-time work at a local construction site, gradually rebuilding his life piece by piece. "How many kids are coming?" he asked, his voice revealing the anxiety they all shared. This gathering represented more than just a birthday celebration. It was a test run for their family's future, a glimpse of normalcy after months of crisis and separation. 5 from his class, Judith replied, checking her list. Plus Ms. Torres will stop by briefly. The mention of the social worker sent a flicker of tension through both parents, a reminder of the oversight that continued to shape their family life. Though progress had been steady, final decisions about reunification remained pending, contingent on continued stability and the completion of the court-mandated family therapy program. Voices approached from the direction of the parking lot, Oliver walking between 2 boys his age, gesturing animatedly as he explained something. Beside them walked a teaching assistant from his school, who had offered to bring Oliver to the park while Judith and his parents prepared the surprise. Chloe, secured in her stroller, spotted her brother and immediately began bouncing and babbling, her favorite person now in view. At 8 months old, she had developed into a cheerful, resilient baby with a shock of blonde hair and her mother's blue eyes. Her developmental milestones were now firmly back on track, the early deprivation overcome through consistent care and nutrition. "Oliver," Diane called, waving with a brightness that only showed the slightest strain around the edges. "Happy birthday." The boy stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he took in the decorated pavilion, the presents stacked on a side table, the handmade banner proclaiming, "Happy 9th birthday, Oliver." For a moment, he simply stared, overwhelmed by the display created specifically for him. Then his face broke into a grin, not the careful, measured smile he so often wore, but a wide, uninhibited expression of pure joy. He raced toward them, almost vibrating with excitement. "You did all this for me?" he asked, taking in the building block decorations and blueprint-patterned tablecloth. "It was a team effort," Judith explained, watching as he circled the pavilion, examining each detail with wonder. "Your mom picked the theme, your dad's handling the grill, and Chloe supervised." As if on cue, Chloe squealed and reached for her brother. Oliver immediately went to her, his hand automatically checking that her sun hat was properly positioned. The big brother's instincts still strong despite months of gradual relief from caretaking responsibilities. "I can't believe you remembered I wanted an architecture party," he said to Diane, a hint of the old wariness mixing with gratitude. "Of course I remembered," she replied softly. "You've been drawing buildings since you were 4. It was a small moment, but significant evidence that beneath the depression that had consumed her, Diane had known her son, had held his preferences and passions somewhere safe until she could acknowledge them again. The party unfolded with the controlled chaos of any children's gathering. Oliver's classmates arrived bearing gifts and boisterous energy. They played structured games organized by Judith and impromptu ones invented on the spot. Ray manned the grill with careful concentration, producing perfectly cooked hot dogs that he distributed with quiet pride. Diane managed the cake and ice cream, her hands steady as she sliced and served, her smile growing more natural with each successful interaction. Watching from a slight distance, Judith observed the Hayes family functioning as a unit, not perfectly, not without moments of awkwardness or uncertainty, but with genuine effort and increasing confidence. Oliver moved between his friends and his family, occasionally glancing toward Judith as if to ensure she remained present, included in the celebration that bridged his separated worlds. Vanessa Torres arrived as promised, her official visit disguised as a birthday greeting. She spoke briefly with Ray and Diane, then pulled Judith aside. "They're doing well," she observed, her professional assessment softened by genuine approval. "Better than I expected, honestly." "Yes," Judith agreed. "The consistency in therapy is making a real difference. And the parenting classes have helped them understand Oliver's needs better. Which brings me to the main reason for my visit." Vanessa's expression turned serious. "The court has reviewed their progress. Barring any setbacks, they're recommending a phased reunification beginning next month. Though expected, the news still landed like a physical blow. That soon. The new apartment will be ready by May 15th. We'd start with weekend visits, then progress to overnight stays, with the goal of full custody restored by mid-June. Mid-June, barely 2 months away. Judith glanced toward Oliver, now laughing as he attempted to hit a piñata, his father standing nearby with a mixture of encouragement and caution on his face. "He's just beginning to trust the stability here," she said quietly. "Another major transition so soon." "I understand your concerns," Vanessa replied, "but the Hayes have met all their benchmarks. Diane's psychiatrist reports significant improvement with her medication regimen. Ray has maintained sobriety and steady employment. They've completed the required parenting courses and family therapy sessions." She paused. "Unless you have specific concerns about their capacity to parent safely, the system is designed to reunify when possible." Judith knew this better than most, having spent years on the other side of similar conversations. The goal had always been clear: temporary intervention, support for recovery, reunification when safe. Now, facing the reality of that goal, she found herself searching for objections that came from her heart rather than professional assessment. What about the continuity in their lives? Oliver's therapy, his school, Chloe's medical care, all manageable from the new apartment. It's less than 2 miles from your place, specifically chosen to maintain their current support network. Vanessa's expression softened. "Including you, if you're willing to remain involved." Before Judith could respond, Oliver came running over, flushed with excitement. "Ms. Torres, did you see me hit the piñata? Dad says I have a good swing for baseball." "I saw," Vanessa smiled. "Very impressive. Are you having a good birthday?" "The best ever," he declared, then turned to Judith. "Can I show Mom and Dad the present you got me before I open the others?" "Please." "Of course," Judith replied, pushing aside her complicated emotions to focus on his happiness. "It's the big one with the blue paper." As Oliver raced back to the gift table, Vanessa touched Judith's arm lightly. "We can discuss the transition plan in detail next week. For now, let's let him enjoy his day." The party continued through the afternoon, culminating in Oliver's delight over his gifts, especially the professional-grade building set Judith had splurged on, complete with architectural drawing tools sized for children. As the celebration wound down and other children departed, the core group remained. Oliver teaching his father the principles of his new building set, Diane gently rocking a drowsy Chloe, and Judith overseeing it all with the complex emotions of someone witnessing something both wonderful and painful. The transition began as planned in mid-May, with Oliver and Chloe spending weekends at the new apartment with their parents. The space was modest but thoughtfully arranged, a 2-bedroom unit in a well-maintained building close to Oliver's school. Through a combination of social service support, Ray's increasing work hours, and the small inheritance from Diane's mother, they had furnished it simply but adequately. Ray had painted Oliver's room the exact shade of blue he preferred and installed bookshelves for his growing collection of architecture books. Diane had decorated Chloe's corner with colorful mobiles and soft blankets. Every detail spoke of their commitment to creating a home that acknowledged their children's needs and preferences. Still, the first weekend visit had been challenging. Oliver had packed and repacked his overnight bag multiple times, his anxiety manifesting in endless lists and questions. Chloe, sensing the tension, had been fussy and clingy. Judith had driven them to the apartment, stayed for the initial awkward hour, then left with reassurances that she was just a phone call away. That night, alone in her suddenly quiet apartment, she had wandered from room to room, touching abandoned toys and half-finished projects, feeling the absence of the children like a physical ache. Around 9 o'clock, her phone had rung, Oliver's voice small but determined on the other end. "Just checking in," he had said, using the phrase she often used with him. "Everything's okay. Dad made spaghetti for dinner." Mom remembered Chloe's bedtime routine exactly right. The call had been brief but revealing, Oliver still shouldering the responsibility of ensuring everyone was connected, managing the emotional currents between the adults in his life. Each weekend visit grew slightly easier, the transition smoother. Oliver began to bring stories back to Judith's apartment on Sunday evenings. Tales of his father teaching him to use simple carpentry tools, his mother helping with a school project, both parents attending his science fair where his bridge design won second place. Small normalcies that were, in their context, extraordinary achievements. Through it all, Judith maintained her role as steady supporter, pushing down her own complicated feelings to focus on the children's needs. She attended family therapy sessions when invited, consulted with teachers and doctors about the transition, and gradually adjusted the contents of her apartment as more toys and clothes migrated permanently to the Hayes' new home. By early June, the overnight visits had extended to 3 consecutive nights. The court date for final custody determination loomed just 2 weeks away. All signs pointed toward a complete reunification, the outcome everyone had been working toward for months. Everyone except, perhaps, the small voice in Judith's heart that rebelled against the impending separation. "You've become too attached," she chided herself one evening, sorting through photos she'd taken over the past months. Oliver learning to ice skate, Chloe taking her first tentative steps, holiday celebrations and ordinary moments preserved digitally. This was always temporary. The truth was more complicated, of course. Her attachment wasn't simply personal. It was rooted in genuine concern about the fragility of the Hayes' recovery. Both parents continued to make progress, but their stability remained relatively new. What would happen when the oversight of social services diminished? When the daily accountability of supervised visitation ended? When the stresses of full-time parenting tested their coping mechanisms? These questions circled in Judith's mind as she drove to the Hayes apartment for dinner, an invitation that had become a weekly tradition during the transition period. As she parked, she noticed Oliver waiting at the window, his face lighting up when he spotted her car. Some things, at least, remained constant. Inside, the apartment hummed with domestic activity. Diane was setting the table while Ray and Oliver worked together on the final assembly of a complex Lego structure. Chloe crawled rapidly across the living room, making a beeline for Judith with delighted recognition. "Something smells wonderful," Judith commented, lifting Chloe into her arms. "Pot roast," Diane replied with evident pride. "My mother's recipe. I found her old recipe box while clearing out her house last weekend." The mention of this ordinary achievement, cooking a family meal from memory, represented months of recovery work. From the woman who had been unable to leave her bed, who had forgotten to feed her infant, this domestic scene represented a transformation that deserved acknowledgement. "That's wonderful," Judith said sincerely. "I'd love the recipe if you're willing to share." Dinner unfolded with the comfortable rhythm they'd established over recent weeks. Oliver dominated the conversation with stories from school and detailed explanations of his latest building projects. Ray discussed his promotion to full-time work at the construction company. Diane shared news from her therapy group and her volunteer position at the community center, a stepping stone toward eventually returning to work. Beneath the normalcy, however, Judith sensed an undercurrent of tension, particularly from Oliver. He spoke a bit too quickly, laughed a bit too loudly, his eyes darting between the adults with subtle vigilance. After dinner, while Diane and Ray cleaned up, Judith helped Oliver with his homework at the small desk in his room. It was then that he finally voiced what had clearly been bothering him. "After the court thing next week," he began, fidgeting with his pencil, "when we live here all the time, will you still visit us?" The question revealed his core fear, that this transition meant losing another adult he had come to trust, another disruption in his already disrupted life. "Of course I will," Judith assured him. "As often as your parents are comfortable with, and as often as you'd like to see me." "What if?" He hesitated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What if things go back to how they were before? What if Mom gets sad again or Dad starts drinking?" It was the fear they all carried, though adults had learned to cloak it in professional terms like relapse prevention and ongoing support structures. "Both your parents have worked very hard to get better," Judith said carefully. "They have tools now that they didn't have before, and people who are helping them stay healthy." She met his eyes directly. "But if you ever feel worried or unsafe, for any reason, you can always call me. Always. That won't change, no matter where you live." He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I made something for you," he said, reaching into his desk drawer. He withdrew a carefully folded paper, hand-drawn and colored with markers. When unfolded, it revealed a detailed blueprint of Judith's apartment, with small figures representing Oliver, Chloe, and Judith drawn in different rooms. "So you don't forget how it was when we lived with you," he explained, his voice catching slightly. Judith felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I could never forget, Oliver. Not ever." Later, as she prepared to leave, Ray approached her somewhat awkwardly while Diane was putting Chloe to bed. "Vanessa mentioned you might be willing to continue as a support person after the custody change," he said, his discomfort with emotional conversations still evident despite months of therapy. "Some kind of formal arrangement where the kids could stay with you sometimes. Like a, what did she call it? Respite care provider," Judith supplied. "It's an arrangement where I'd remain a certified resource for your family, available for planned visits or emergencies if needed." Ray nodded, relief evident in his expression. "We'd like that. Both of us would." He paused, struggling with his next words. "Look, I know I haven't always been, it's hard for me to say this, but what you did for our kids when we couldn't, there's no way to thank someone for that. They're remarkable children," Judith said simply. "They deserved every bit of support they received. They talk about you all the time, you know. Oliver's always saying Ms. Winters does it this way or Ms. Winters taught me that. Even Chloe lights up when we mention your name." He shook his head slightly. "Used to make me jealous, truth be told. Reminded me of everything I'd messed up. But Dr. Brennan helped me see it differently, that they were lucky to have someone who cared that much when we weren't able to." The acknowledgement was significant coming from a man who had initially viewed Judith as an enemy, an intruder in his family. "All children deserve adults who care," she replied. "The more, the better." The court hearing for final custody determination arrived with the first truly hot day of summer. The courthouse's air conditioning labored against the heat, creating a background hum in the family court where the Hayes case was scheduled for review. Oliver sat between his parents on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, dressed in his most formal clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt that already showed the wrinkles of an active 9-year-old. Chloe, perched on Diane's lap, wore a flowered dress and played contentedly with a teething ring, oblivious to the significance of the day. Judith sat nearby with Vanessa, reviewing final documentation and waiting for their case to be called. The proceeding itself would be brief and largely formality at this point. All evaluations had been submitted, all reports finalized. The judge would review the family's progress, officially terminate the temporary guardianship, and restore full custody to Ray and Diane with minimal ongoing supervision. "Oliver seems nervous," Vanessa observed quietly. "Change is still difficult for him," Judith replied. "Even positive change. And for you." Vanessa's perceptiveness had always been her strongest professional quality. Judith managed a small smile. "Also difficult, but necessary." Before further conversation could unfold, the courtroom doors opened and the clerk called their case. The proceedings moved with the efficient pace of a system processing one family's story among dozens. Documentation reviewed, statements taken, recommendations confirmed. Judge Martinez, a compassionate veteran of family court, spoke directly to Oliver and, symbolically, to Chloe. "I've reviewed all the reports about your family," she explained gently. "Your parents have worked very hard these past months to create a safe and loving home for you both. Today, I'm going to officially say that you can live with them full-time again." Oliver nodded solemnly, his hand finding his father's as if seeking confirmation. "Do you have any questions for me?" the judge asked. Oliver hesitated, then spoke with the careful deliberation that characterized his approach to important matters. "Will Ms. Winters still be part of our family? Not living with us, but still ours?" The question, so simple yet profound, brought unexpected emotion to the formal proceeding. Judge Martinez glanced at the documented respite care arrangement before responding. "Yes," she confirmed. "Ms. Winters will continue to be an important person in your life, just in a different way than before." With that reassurance, the final orders were signed, the temporary guardianship officially terminated, and full custody restored to Ray and Diane Hayes with provisions for continued support services for 12 months. Outside the courthouse, the summer heat wrapped around them as they stood somewhat awkwardly on the steps. The legal proceedings concluded, but the emotional transition still very much in process. "We did it," Ray said, his voice thick with emotion rarely displayed. "We got our family back." Diane, tears streaming freely down her face, clutched Chloe close while reaching for Oliver with her free hand. "Thank you," she said to Judith, the simple phrase carrying the weight of everything that had transpired over the past 6 months. Judith nodded, not trusting her voice in that moment. The children who had arrived in her life during the darkest days of winter were now leaving in the bright light of summer, transformed by the same seasonal certainty that had turned dormant trees to vibrant green. Oliver approached her, his expression serious despite the celebratory atmosphere. "We're still coming for dinner on Sunday, right?" Dad promised. "Absolutely," Judith confirmed. "I'm making your favorite chocolate cake. And we're still going to the Science Museum next week?" "Just as planned." His shoulders relaxed slightly, reassured by these concrete promises of continued connection. Then, with the directness that children bring to emotional moments, he wrapped his arms around her waist in a fierce hug. "I'm glad you found us," he whispered, "even though it was because of bad stuff happening." "Me too," Judith replied, returning his embrace and meeting Diane's eyes over his head. Two women connected by their love for the same child, one by birth and one by circumstance. The summer unfolded with its own rhythms and routines. The Hayes family settled into their new normal, Ray working full-time at the construction company, Diane continuing her outpatient treatment while caring for Chloe and volunteering 3 mornings a week. Oliver attended a day camp focused on engineering and design, returning home each evening full of stories and sketches. Judith adjusted to her own new normal. The initial silence of her apartment had gradually transformed from painful emptiness to peaceful solitude. She returned to hobbies long neglected, reconnected with friends, and even began dating again. Tentative steps toward a personal life that had been entirely subsumed by her commitment to the Hayes children. The respite care arrangement provided structure for ongoing connection. Oliver and Chloe stayed with her 1 weekend each month, allowing their parents time for their own relationship and recovery work. Sunday dinners became a tradition, sometimes at Judith's apartment, sometimes at the Hayes home. Special occasions, Oliver's science competitions, Chloe's developmental checkups, often included all 3 adults supporting the children together. It wasn't always smooth. Ray still struggled with stress management, occasionally withdrawing into sullen silence that triggered Oliver's vigilance. Diane had one significant depressive episode in late summer, requiring adjustment to her medication and increased therapy sessions. During that difficult week, the children had stayed with Judith, returning home only when Diane had stabilized with new treatment. But unlike before, these challenges were met with resources, support systems, and honest communication. The Hayes family was learning, slowly but steadily, to navigate difficulties without collapsing beneath them. On a perfect September afternoon, Judith sat on a bench at Riverfront Park, watching Oliver teach Chloe to feed the ducks that paddled along the shore. At 15 months, Chloe had developed into a sturdy toddler with her mother's blue eyes and her father's determined chin. She followed her brother everywhere, her first clear word having been an approximation of his name. "Ollie, bread," she demanded, holding out her small hand for another piece of the stale baguette they'd brought for the ducks. "Be patient," he instructed, breaking off a tiny piece with exaggerated care. "Like this, see? Gentle throws so they don't get scared." Judith smiled at his serious instruction, so typical of the boy who approached everything with careful consideration. Though he had gradually released much of his caretaking role as his parents stabilized, the bond between siblings remained extraordinary, the connection forged during those difficult months apparently unbreakable. "Sorry we're late," Diane called, approaching from the parking area with Ray beside her. "Therapy ran long today." "No problem," Judith assured her, making room on the bench. "We've been enjoying the perfect weather." As the adults settled into comfortable conversation, Judith observed the subtle changes in both parents. Diane's face had filled out, her movements more energetic, her laugh more frequent. Ray carried himself differently, the defensive hunch of his shoulders replaced by a more open posture. His interactions with Oliver marked by attentive listening rather than distracted dismissal. They weren't perfect. They would never be perfect. But they were present and trying, learning through therapy and experience to be the parents their children needed. Oliver's teacher sent home a note about the gifted program, Diane mentioned. She thinks his spatial reasoning skills are exceptional. He's been talking about becoming an architect since he was 5, Ray added with evident pride. Getting involved in real designing now. You should see the treehouse plans he's drawn up. Their conversation continued, flowing easily from school updates to Chloe's latest developmental milestones to practical matters of daily life. They had developed a co-parenting relationship unlike any Judith had witnessed in her years of social work. Not the traditional definition involving separated parents, but something equally intentional and perhaps more complex. As afternoon drifted toward evening, they gathered their things and prepared to part ways. The Hayes family heading home for dinner, Judith to her book club meeting. Oliver approached her as the others packed up the remains of their duck-feeding expedition. "I've been thinking," he began, in the thoughtful tone that usually preceded something significant, "about everything that happened. The bad stuff, but also the good stuff after." "What conclusions have you reached?" Judith asked, matching his seriousness with her own. "I think sometimes families need help to be families," he said slowly, working out his thoughts as he spoke. "Like, it's not just people who are related. It's people who help each other and stay even when things are hard." He glanced toward his parents, then back to Judith. "Like you did." The insight, profound from a child not yet 10, settled over Judith like a benediction. In her professional life, she had always understood family as something to be preserved, protected, and when necessary, reunified. Her work with the Hayes family had expanded that understanding, revealing family as something that could grow beyond biology and court orders, encompassing chosen connections as well as inherited ones. "I think you're exactly right," she told him, her heart full. "That's exactly what family is." Oliver nodded, satisfied with her confirmation of his theory. "Good," he said decisively, "because you're definitely part of ours now." With that simple declaration, he ran to join his parents and sister, turning once to wave before taking Chloe's hand to help her navigate the uneven path. Judith watched them go. The family that had entered her life through crisis and remained through choice. Their bonds remade but not broken by all they had endured. The river flowed beside them. The same river that had been frozen when Oliver first walked through those hospital doors carrying his infant sister. Now it reflected the golden light of late afternoon, moving steadily forward while reflecting back the beauty around it. Judith remained on the bench a moment longer, watching until the Hayes family reached their car. There had been a time when she'd feared this outcome, when reunification had seemed like an ending rather than a continuation. Now she understood it differently. The children she had come to love were not lost to her. They had simply helped expand her definition of family, creating space for connection that transcended conventional boundaries. As she finally rose to walk to her own car, Judith felt the weight of the past months settle into something lighter. Not an absence but a presence. Not an ending but an evolution. The winter that had brought Oliver and Chloe to her door had yielded to spring and then to summer, each season bringing its own lessons in letting go and holding on. Now autumn approached, promising its own transformations. The river would continue flowing, the children would continue growing, and the family they had collectively created, unconventional, resilient, and ultimately healing, would continue its journey forward, learning together what it meant to breathe freely after holding their breath for so long.